Hi guys, welcome back to Shrink Happens. My name is Christina. I'm a psychologist, and on this channel we dive into famous characters from movies and literature as if they were clients that just walked into a therapy session. And today we're diving into Wuthering Heights. As you probably know, recently there has been a movie premiere of Wuthering Heights with Margot, Robbie, and Jacob Elordi. And from what I've seen, the movie has received pretty mixed reviews. A lot of people online seem to be a bit upset about the fact that the movie has changed quite a few details from the original novel. And as we all know, the devil is in the details. But I think that's a very interesting story, and I decided to do it a proper way. First, I read the book, and then I watched the new movie. And yes, they're definitely different in a lot of ways. In this video, I'm going to mostly focus on the book, because at its core, it tells a very beautiful and tragic story. A story about a traumatic childhood that can turn a person into a monster, and about a destructive passion that people often confuse for love. And this kind of passion is, as usual, very highly romanticized, which is very dangerous because this kind of passion can not only destroy the life of two people, but poison the generations to come. At some point, while reading the book, I watched the trailer, and it said something like, "Wuthering Heights, the greatest love story of all time," which I personally think is nonsense. There are definitely a lot of other stories that could compete for that title. And actually, it would be very interesting to ask you, what do you think is the greatest love story of all time? Because I personally struggle to name one. What really bothers me is how the media and pop culture often confuses passion for love. Since childhood, we're fed stories where chaos, obsession, jealousy, and emotional extremes are presented as the ultimate form of true love. And we all grow up thinking that this intensity is what true love should be like. There's even a popular saying, love lasts 3 years. People often say it when relationships fall apart, almost to justify why things didn't work out. But I think what actually lasts for 3 years is not love, but passion. Lasts for 3 years, sometimes even shorter than this. Passion is an intense and beautiful feeling. It's overwhelming and consuming. But real love is something very different. Real love develops slowly after people go through different stages of relationships together. After conflict, after all the illusions fell apart, after you actually learn who the other person really is. So in that sense, if we take that as a definition of love, what Catherine and Heathcliff had is not love, in my opinion, it's passion. And the novel actually shows us how destructive that feeling can be, and how much suffering it can create. So in my opinion, the book is not celebrating that connection, but shows us how destructive this passion can be. So let's talk a little bit about the characters. The two main characters that are usually associated with the book or the movie are Catherine and Heathcliff. I will give you a brief recap, but I will mostly recap the book, and I will tell you how it's different from the movie and why I think what's shown in the book is much more important for understanding psychological dynamics of the whole masterpiece. So, in the book, Catherine lives in a somewhat wealthy family with her father, mother, and older brother. And one day her father returns from the trip from Liverpool, and he brings a boy that he just picked up from the street. The boy has dark complexion. Nobody really knows where he comes from, where his parents are, who he is. We basically do not know any details from his past. He's simply brought into the household and is given the name Heathcliff. And the reactions in the family are quite mixed. The father is strangely attached to the boy, while the mother and the older brother, they dislike him, and the household in general, they don't really accept him, and the only person that seems to have a connection with him is Catherine. And then they kind of grow up together. They spend a lot of time just running around the fields, and basically they grow up like wild children. The book never explicitly says that they were in love until a certain moment, but it's implied that their bond from the childhood was incredibly strong. And as they grew up together and they grew older, their feelings transformed with them. And here how it's different from the new movie. In the movie, Catherine just lives with her father. There's no mother figure, no older brother. So we don't get a chance to see the hostility that this little boy Heathcliff receives when he arrives into this household. And in the book, the dynamic that is shown is extremely important. In the film, on the other hand, we see that Heathcliff is just simply brought into the household, and later we see scenes where he defends Catherine from her drunken father. That kind of shows him as this noble boy who protects Catherine and takes care of her. But in my opinion, by doing this, they miss the most important psychological detail of the whole story: how early negative experiences shape a person. In the novel, Heathcliff grows up in the environment full of humiliation, constant rejection, and emotional deprivation. Those early wounds are not just background details that you can just throw away. These are what gradually transforms him into this destructive, vengeful person that he becomes later as the story progresses. It shows how trauma, if left unprocessed, which is usually the case, can twist love into obsession and pain into cruelty. Basically, the bottom line is that Heathcliff is a deeply traumatized child. We know absolutely nothing about his life before he was found. We don't know who his parents were, where he comes from, and what happened to him, why he ended up alone on the Liverpool streets. And from the moment he arrives into the household, he's constantly humiliated. People call him a stranger, they question his origin, they make assumptions that he's a gypsy, and they treat him as someone inferior. And all of this happens in front of him. Imagine how that feels to a child. In the book, as long as Catherine's father is alive, the boy receives some kind of protection, but when he passes away, everything changes because the older brother returns home, and he doesn't like Heathcliff, he hates him because he's jealous of all the affection that Heathcliff received from his father. So the older brother starts treating Heathcliff terribly. He forces him to work in a field, he denies him education, he basically reduces him to the status of a servant. And here's a simple question: if you treat a child terribly, what kind of adult do you think that child will become? Heathcliff grows up as a vengeful, resentful, and in many ways narcissistic man. Now let's talk a little bit about Catherine's psychological profile. From a psychological perspective, she shows a lot of traits that today we would associate with borderline personality dynamics. She is described as incredibly beautiful, cheerful, charismatic, but at the same time very impulsive, emotionally unstable, and dramatic. She lives at the peak of her emotions all the time, whether good or bad. Everything is super intense for her. She kind of burns in her feelings. She has emotional breakdowns, historical episodes where she even loses the touch with reality. She doesn't recognize people around her. She has very unstable emotional personality. There's this famous line that's been romanticized where she says that I am Heathcliff, kind of saying that they're inseparable and they share one soul between the two of them. So that shows the connection that they share is incredibly intense, but also incredibly unhealthy. And then another character appears in the story, a neighboring young gentleman from a respected family that Catherine decides to marry. Not necessarily because she loves him more, but because he seems like the right choice. And Heathcliff, on the other hand, he's a nobody. He has no name, no title, no position, and he's constantly rejected by people around him. And one day, Heathcliff overhears the conversation about her decision, and it completely destroys him. His pride is shattered, his love is humiliated. And that night, he simply disappears without saying goodbye. He later returns after a few years as a completely different man. He's well-dressed, confident, he behaves like a gentleman. He's dressed like a gentleman too. Somehow now he has money and status, but no one really knows where it came from. And there's another very important psychological layer here. Very often, deep childhood wounds can become a very powerful source of motivation. People who grow up feeling rejected or not good enough sometimes develop this enormous drive to succeed, to gain status, recognition, money, and that's exactly what we see happen to Heathcliff. The humiliation that he experiences becomes his fuel. It gives him the determination to change himself and to rise socially. So in real life, people sometimes who had a similar past, in some kind of way, achieve incredible things because deep down, they're just trying to prove something. But to who? To a parent? To a partner? To society? To that person that once rejected them? From the outside, it looks impressive, and many people even think that's a good thing. And in some ways, it is. I mean, when life gives you lemons. But there's also a very painful psychological trap in this pattern. Often the hidden belief underneath is, once I achieve enough, once I become successful enough, once I prove myself, then I will be finally worthy of love. That's the love and acceptance that these people chase, not the wealth, the status, and other things. Once they were deprived of love, and they think that that is the thing that will finally give that love back to them. And that's the main tragedy of Heathcliff, in my opinion. He spends years building power and wealth, but the deeper wound, the feeling of being rejected and unloved, never really heals. If I imagine Heathcliff as a therapy client, the work with him would not be about making him more successful or more powerful. Quite the opposite, actually. It would be about reconnecting him with the part of himself that was once a rejected and abandoned child. It would mean slowly processing the grief and humiliation he once experienced so he can truly heal. It would allow him to feel the pain in safe environment rather than turning it into revenge, which is exactly what he did. And most importantly, it would involve challenging that belief that love can only be earned from status or power, helping him to see that your worth as a human being doesn't depend on those things. The real healing would be something very different from what Heathcliff chose as his path. It would mean letting go of the need to prove his worth and learning that he deserves love long before he gained his status and power. So let's go back to the story. When he comes back and he meets Catherine again, she's married, and that's where the tragic dynamic begins because they clearly still love each other, and Catherine seems to regret her decision, and Heathcliff can't really forgive her for what she did. From his perspective, it's something like, I loved you, you loved me too, but then you chose status over love. However, Catherine's husband is actually not a bad person at all, in my opinion. He's a kind, gentle, educated person that seems to really love Catherine. He's not just passionate like Heathcliff, yes. But Heathcliff also doesn't return for love. He returns for revenge. His entire life becomes about humiliating others and gaining power over the people, and even their children, of the people who once rejected him. Throughout the whole book, we can see that Heathcliff, he's almost like emotionally numb. There's always something guarded about him. It's almost like he's always disconnected from his feelings. And psychologically, it makes total sense because if a child experiences severe trauma growing up, like Heathcliff grew up in the streets, maybe he was treated something less than a human, emotional shutdown makes total sense and it becomes a survival mechanism. Which brings me to the central idea that I would like to share with you today. Children are shaped by the environment they grow up in. In psychology, there's this huge debate called nature versus nurture. It's like how much of who we become is determined by genetics versus the environment that we grow up in. It's almost impossible to fully prove either side. Even children that were raised in the same family can turn out to be very different. Because sometimes in reality they grow up with two different versions of their parents. Parents also change over time, psychologically, financially, and emotionally. But what we do know for a fact is that childhood experiences have a profound impact on adult personality. There's a famous psychological experiment that I would like to tell you about today. It explains very well what's happening to Heathcliff as a child and then later as an adult. In the 1950s, Harry Harlow conducted a series of experiments on attachment using baby rhesus monkeys. In the experiment, the baby monkeys were separated from their biological mother and they were given two artificial mothers. One was made of wire and had a bottle of milk attached to it, but the other mother was made of soft cloth and I think it had some heating lamp installed into it so it gave comfort and warmth. But it didn't have the milk bottle attached to it. Surprisingly, to the researchers, the baby monkeys spent most of their time attached to the soft cloth mother, not the wired one, even though it had the bottle of milk. So that kind of drew a conclusion that what babies needed more is not necessarily the food, but the emotional comfort, warmth, and security that the babies seemed to get when they were cuddling with the cloth mother. Harlow's experiment showed that early emotional deprivation had very devastating effect. The monkeys that grew up without real nurturing developed severe social problems, anxiety, aggression, and they couldn't form healthy relationships later in life. So this is where I draw a connection to Heathcliff. When we first see him arriving to Catherine's house as a child, he is already abandoned kid. And instead of receiving care and belonging, even though he did receive some from the father figure, he faces rejection, humiliation, and abuse. And we don't know what he has been through. That kind of early deprivation can deeply distort the person's capacity for love and for trust. So Heathcliff's later cruelty and obsession with revenge can be seen not simply as evil, but as an outcome of profound developmental trauma. He's a child who never received the emotional security that he needed. And unfortunately, there are many children in real life who grow up without a basic sense of security. And when I read Wuthering Heights, to me, it's just a very clear example of what can happen to a traumatized child. He's the man who grows up and humiliates others in order to regain that power. I was humiliated, so now I will humiliate. So if we look deeper, he's not just a villain. He's a traumatized boy. And the trauma, unfortunately, doesn't stop with him. In the second part of the book, and this is something that wasn't shown in the movie, he begins to abuse the children of the other characters. Luckily, the novel ends with a quiet resolution after the generation of suffering, obsession, and revenge. And I think this is an important message for the audience. If there's a toxic person in your family, maybe even a parent, doesn't mean that you should justify their behavior, but it's very important to know their story. Not to excuse them, but understand the mechanism, so you can gain the ability to make a different choice. This way, the whole situation loses its power over you. Because trauma often travels through generations, and that's what psychologists call generational trauma. But the good news is, just as in the book, the cycle can be broken. It's up to us to change the way we treat our children, our partners, and people around us. So to me, Wuthering Heights is not a story about the greatest love story of all time, or even like the greatest passion of all time. It's a story about trauma, destruction, and the way human pain can echo across generations. And another very important thing about this novel to me is that Heathcliff becomes trapped by his own revenge. His entire life just slowly collapses under the weight of his desire to revenge. Instead of healing, instead of letting go, instead of choosing forgiveness, he spends decades trying to settle old wounds. And in the end, ultimately, he lost. And I mean, yes, he succeeded in his mission. He humiliates people who hurt him, he gains the power over the land, he takes the control of the whole household where he once was the unwanted child and then unwanted men. But he never builds anything genuine. There's not a single person in this world that cares for him when Catherine is no longer there. He never creates a loving family or a peaceful life. He becomes bitter, cruel, and deeply isolated person. Many people on this planet have experienced very traumatizing childhood, but the question is what to do with it. So the novel shows us very difficult truth, almost spiritual one, not as much psychological, is at some point you're faced with a choice. We can spend our entire life swimming in the pain of what happened to us, or we can try to choose a different path. Heathcliff never made the second choice, and that's why his story is so tragic. And I will leave you with this. If you have a chance, please do read the book. My mentor once gave me a piece of advice that really stayed with me. Sometimes it's worth putting away the self-help book and read the classics instead. In great literature, we don't just read about ideas, you live through them with the characters. You witness their choices, their mistakes, their suffering, and their growth. And in many ways, this experience of living their life with someone can teach us just as much or even more than the self-help books do. So please let us know in the comments whether you watched the movie, if you read the book, what your thoughts are, if you agree with me or you disagree, what was the most important part of the story for you. And take a good care of yourself as always, and I'll see you in the next video.